Beautiful. Thank you. So we're recording this meeting, and if you do not wish to be recorded, then you're going to have trouble participating. We'll start with public input on any items that are not on the agenda. Okay, hearing none, we'll move on. The chair's report is simply we've been very busy at the end of the summer with many issues being raised and a lot of public emails being sent in on those issues. And we'll be addressing some of those issues tonight. We're going to start the meeting with our first agenda item, which is correspondence on the town website. And in your packet, you should have a brief outline of policy regarding the town website that is a summary of the discussion that we had at our Board of Selectmen planning meeting on Saturday, August 14th. And that summary's been put into a bulleted policy form. So this policy you've had a chance to look at. Are there any comments from board members? And if there are none, I'm going to read it so that we can call this, we can have this be the first reading of the policy and then do a second reading at our meeting on September 20th.
Yes, I have a comment.
And the comment is?
The comment is on the third bullet in the second section for the purpose of identifying and collecting. I am very uncomfortable with that as because I imagine the case where someone sends a message to a member of a committee saying, I think the chairman of your committee is embezzling funds or extorting kids who want to, parents who want to send their kids to the playground. And I don't want to have to send that email to the chairman of that committee, who was the person who's being complained about.
Well, the email itself, under state regulations, is a matter of public record. That is, not that it's going to be publicized, but that it is a matter of the records of the town of Manchester by the Sea, even though it came to your private email or your home email rather than your. Let me finish him. Let me finish. The point that you're making is a good one. That if there's a matter that is specific to misconduct of a particular board chair, obviously sending that on, both identifying who the individual is and et cetera would be a problem. But the email could still be captured as part of the public records of the town of Manchester by the Sea by forwarding that kind of an email, which I don't think we have many of, to the town administrator.
And if the town administrator is involved? And I'm not saying
you're really spinning it out here. And
no, I am not spinning it out, because at least in Harwichport, there was a situation involving the harbor committee and that where the state became seriously involved. And it did involve people in the town government, as well as who are employed in town government, as well as people who are working on committees. This is not something that is completely imaginary.
Well, I don't think it's something that's completely imaginary, but I think you're taking a very, very rare event and changing and trying to object to the policy. So the policy is by state regulation. We can't get around the policy.
Yes, I am reading the state regulation. I'm sorry I'm behind on that, but I think the state regulation requires that the records be preserved, not that they be forwarded to any particular account accessible by any particular person in the town government. They have to be available to a records request, but they do not have to be in the town vault, guarded by whoever.
So a couple of things, if I could jump in. There are exceptions to what are public records, and matters of personnel typically qualify, not always, but often qualify. There's an ability to treat those types of emails. So all board members are considered municipal employees. So they do fall under those personnel exemption rules. So that's one avenue for this situation that Ann raises. The guidelines that the Secretary of State has put out does recommend very strongly that all emails sit on a town server that are stored on a town source. So if you have a town email already, then that automatically happens. So for all of you that have town emails, you don't have to forward to a chair. For boards and committees that where members do not have a town email account, and providing one to each chair, which is what we've talked about, then, again, 99% of those emails are appropriately forwarded to the chair for keeping on the town email server.
Our policy doesn't have any exemptions.
The policy has to follow state law, and those exemptions apply. So we are governed by state law. We are creatures of the state. And we have no option but to follow state law. We can't supersede state law.
So why doesn't the policy say subject to the following 1423 exemptions?
No, we certainly can add that. I mean, it's implied, but we can certainly add it for clarity.
I'm not sure that most people who volunteer for a town board would understand that there are exemptions if they just see this policy. This is a very black and white policy.
So the whole point of having this discussion is to improve upon it and referencing.
So, Ann, what would you suggest we do?
My first suggestion was that we just have an email for the town for records, to which you get access only if you are making a records request. And rather than sending it to individual, town chairs, just if you get an email on a private that is legitimately is a record that goes to that account. That way it's on our server, but it's not available without a records request.
So you're suggesting that all emails that come to board and committee members who are using personal accounts or who have have a town account, but who have received something in their personal account that relates to business before their board, that all those emails go to one address?
Yes, that's my first suggestion. My second is that there be a reference to the list of exemptions, so that if the emails that people get are exempt. They don't have to forward them.
So if there's information that that relates to matters before the board that's not in the category of the personnel situation that you're referring to, and those emails go to one central town email hopper, how does that information get to the board itself?
Does it have to?
Uh,
If I get email from some loosely, some friend who has got a wild complaint, I understand that it's a public record. I'm not sure that I need to explain, that I need to bring it up to the board.
Jeff?
yes.
This doesn't necessarily seem like a bad idea. It leaves, yes, it separates, it decouples two things. One, it decouples, decouples the notion, the issue of management of boards and how they communicate, or rather, how they handle matters that should be brought before the chair, from the issue of email and public records, which I think is okay. I think if we try to overload this policy to solve all of those problems, it might be a little bit much. Ann's solution of having a central email does help sidestep any issues where people might have serious concerns about forwarding emails. And it might help actually in some cases declutter the chair email boxes, because I can see for committees that don't have, where most of the members don't have email addresses, it's quite possible, even likely, that they are getting emails on their personal accounts. They should be forwarding, but if they forward all of them to the chair's email box, the chair's email box might get a little bit saturated. So, and combined with threads from miscellaneous people where they don't really understand where those threads are coming from or why they're arriving. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea to use a central email box for forwarding this material. It does satisfy the requirements we have. Makes it easy for the records access officer to get to them, and it makes it simple to avoid issues of whether or not the appropriate records have been kept.
Do you want to add anything to that?
I'm sorry, did you ask me?
No, I asked Eli, did you want to add anything more to what you were saying?
No, I mean, I think, well, actually, to Ann's point about including a reference to the exemptions, we can either do that. We can either include the exemptions, or we can include a pointer to the appropriate state document that talks about the exemptions, and tell people that there are exemptions in here and they should look. I tend not to really want to recapitulate large numbers of facts that are part of state documents, especially if those facts are volatile. So if the state ever changes those standards of exemptions, then this policy would have to be updated. So I think it would be appropriate to include a reference and tell people there are exemptions, and they should educate themselves.
Other board members? Becky, you're shaking your head no?
No, I think it's, well, you all have a lot more experience with this than I, so I'm happy with this start. Thank you.
John?
My only comment would be is this is a document that is going to have to be reviewed by, I don't know, 150, however many people are on various boards in town. And there are a lot of subtleties here. I just don't know how, if people are going to, I understand it's not a lot of bullets, not hard to read, but communicating all of this to everyone will be a challenge so that they understand what's involved. I think we have to rely on the chairpersons of each of these boards to share what the interpretations are with their committee members.
So it can be something that we
Be in the training.
review. Exactly, in the
Yes.
boarding. In the training.
Understand it's something else that has to go in there.
Yeah. I mean, it's part of open meeting law and public records. They go hand
Yeah.
in hand, and it's something that should be reviewed annually anyways.
Well, I'm interested in seeing how this copy is going to read. That's all, but this is what this is about.
So would there be an objection to taking the chair out of the town address created for each committee? Taking chair out of that and just having it be, as in this example, bike ped at manchestermass.us as the place that's the repository for everything bike ped. I'm concerned that there's going to be this massive email account that's going to be hard to negotiate in terms of getting emails for a particular records request that might come in. So I'm concerned about it from a management point of view. I'm not averse to having the chair out of this. I don't want to see these emails unless you feel like the email is an email that the committee chair or the committee as a whole should be aware of. I am concerned about having openness and trust in a committee. That's a different matter. So could we edit this to take out chair as part of the email address and create it for each committee chair? Take the chair out of that and just say created for each committee. And if the access to that would only be available to the
Pursuant to a records request. Sorry to interrupt, but
I'm concerned, Ann, about the issue of someone writes to a board member on their personal email address, a board or a committee member on their personal email address. And the person does their due diligence and sends a copy of that on to the main email account or the committee email account that's the storage for these. But but doesn't share it with other members of the board for whatever reason. And then that person, that resident says, well, I wrote to a selectman and shared this with the selectman. Why don't you know about it? It concerns me that it's going to put barriers to the communication. I understand your concerns about privacy of these communications, but it concerns me that if someone is saying, I've got concerns about this or that policy or this or that discussion that was going on, I think that this is what should happen, and that doesn't get communicated to the board as a whole, how do we deliberate on that? How do we change the policy if it's a good, if it's a situation that should be changed, if we don't even have access to them? So that's a question I'm raising. And both Ann and Becky have their hands up. Ann did first, so go ahead. Ann.
Oh, let Becky go first.
I was just going to say that.
And I would like, since you had your hand up first, I'm not
Okay.
sure why you're saying let Becky go first. I'd like you to go first.
Okay. I think that you have to trust the board members to bring forward things that are significant to the board. And if someone feels that they have brought something up to a board member and has not gone to the rest of the board, they have access to the website and they can find other people to send it to. I don't necessarily think that everybody who corresponds with me on my private account has and expresses a concern, has a concern that really warrants being brought up to the Board of Selectmen. And I am sure that those people are perfectly capable of bringing them up to other selectmen if they're not happy with my response.
All right. You want to add anything to that? Ann, do you want to add anything to that?
No, thank you.
Okay. Becky? I just want to make sure you were done.
I'm just trying to put my hand down now. There we go. Okay. I agree basically with what Ann is saying and Eli. I guess my concern would be if a concern is brought up, about something, does a person respond to that email or just send that email off to the vault? And I guess I'm thinking in terms of transparency and communication, and making sure that at least a concern is responded to, whether it's, it follows up to be addressed or not. That's one thing, but I just
That's a different
sure
matter than this policy, though, Becky. I agree with you. But that's a different matter than this policy, and I would like to stay on track with the policy because otherwise we can go down to a lot of different avenues. If that's okay with you.
I agree. I just want to make sure that that's not the stop, is that it goes into the vault. All right. Thank you.
So in terms of the changes to the policy, we want to see two changes to the policy as a board. One is that we eliminate chair from any email that would become the repository for the records of private emails that have been sent on matters that are before the board. And take out the word chair. from the third bullet point? And do we want to add a reference to the state regulations document concerning the handling of emails? Is there any other changes that we would like to make to this at this point?
Um,
Ann?
Yeah, I don't share your concern about having a single repository. It's electronically searchable. It certainly is a great deal easier than going through all of the written minutes in hard copy, which is a regular part of a record search. One place to look means that you will also find things that may be related between different committees. So I would like to see it be a single repository that is restricted to access in response to records requests.
Greg?
Either way is fine from my perspective.
I'm just thinking about when I try and search my own email for emails that I know that I've received. And I find it very challenging to find them because they bury deep down into a string of emails. And those are all emails that have come in through my Manchester account. Hopefully we're talking about not a lot of emails for committees that have their own email address. Have their own Manchester email address. But if the consensus of the Board of Selectmen is to have one repository for all these emails, I was suggesting that it be done by committee to simplify the searching and perhaps being more accurate about capturing emails in a public records request. So if the consensus of the committee is, and Greg's ready to go with this, and IT says, yeah, sure, that's no problem, then we can go ahead and have one email address. I'm just trying to consider what it's like to try and search for particular emails.
So question, Jeff. So the way this is implemented, is that to say if a committee member gets an outside email that's pertinent to a topic that the committee has, and they would send it to that address, not to their chair?
No, I didn't say that.
Or is there going to be
They're
copied to
required
both?
to send it to that address
Okay, but they
because
may.
it is a matter of town records
Correct.
if it comes to their personal email, which is true for probably 90% of the committees and boards that we have.
All right. So it's copied to that as well as to the committee chair.
No, it doesn't have to be. I mean, Ann's saying she wants to have discretion over what she shares that comes to her personal account.
I understand, but if it only goes to the central email, how does it get to the committee chair who should probably see that? It's a topic of discussion for the committee.
That's up to the particular board member.
Okay, so the board member.
According to what Ann's proposing.
Right. So so any board member, they can get something and they can send it. They need to send it certainly to the central repository. And if it's a topic of discussion for the committee in general, they would also send it to the committee chair.
If they saw fit.
Yes. And I would think in the majority of situations, that's what the situation would be. I just don't want to see a greater, the logistics creating more work. I think each committee member has to be aware of how this process works and use their judgment. I don't think this applies to very many emails. for most people, but because right now, I think if they come in, they say share it with their committee chair and on you go. But of course, Ann is mentioning the exceptional situations where it's should not necessarily be a broadly distributed piece of information.
Jeff?
Yes, sir.
So again, I'll reiterate that I do think that we can leave it up to the individual boards to manage whether or not, individual members to manage whether or not a particular email should also be sent to a chair. And that's a matter of training and board management, not something that necessarily should be instilled in policy here. I will, thinking about it a little bit, I do think that it is probably not a bad idea to have separate emails for the individual committees. I was imagining a circumstance where public records requests would come in, they would say they wanted any emails sent to or communications between members of a particular committee. And it would make it easier to, well, I think that it would make it easier to search those. But you know what I'd do is I would hand this aspect of the decision over to town staff for advice, because town staff is going to have to fulfill these requests. And Greg and the RAO should probably opine on whether one solution is preferable to another, and if they cogitated on a little bit.
So we can do that. My first stop will be to IT to get their guidance as what is easiest for them.
Okay, the other aspects of this policy in regards to posting to the town website, the purpose of the town website, and the change in the correspondence section of the agenda. I don't know that necessarily even needs to be a policy. That's why I put a question mark in it. Any other comments on those things? Because I'd like to keep moving. It's now after 7 o'clock and we're already 15 minutes behind.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the correspondence section either, about whether or not that should be captured in this policy or not. I would be fine with moving it out. I think
It can just be a clarification of practice for the board.
Yeah.
Because not all boards have a correspondence section in their agendas.
Agreed.
Okay, so let me do a quick read through on this so that we're presenting this to the public as well. The policy regarding posting to the town website. The Board of Selectmen recognizes that the town website is a communication device established for town staff, boards, and committees to communicate information to the public, particularly residents of the town of Manchester by the Sea. The town website is not considered a public forum for the interchange of commentary, opinion, support, or objection to the decisions of the town and boards. As such, the Board of Selectmen has concluded that comments from the public will not be posted on the website of the town of Manchester by the Sea. Policy regarding the receipt of email addressed to town of Manchester boards and committees. The Board of Selectmen acknowledges, that should probably read members of town of Manchester boards and committees, but the Board of Selectmen acknowledges that email sent to official Manchester by the Sea email addresses, that is at manchester.ma.us, by definition become a matter of public record. Emails that are sent to board or committee members' personal email which refer to the business or actions of the board or committee are also a matter of public record. And we're going to add a reference there to the state regs. For the purposes of identifying, collecting all email correspondence in response to a public records request, board and committee members are required to forward correspondence received in their personal email addresses related to, this is an insert, related to businesses or actions of the board or committee, to a town email address for now created for each committee, because I'm hearing both sides of that, and we can strike that out in our next reading. Okay, and the example is mbts.record@manchester.ma.us. And finally, I'm hearing from Eli, I didn't hear a consensus from other board members, but I'd like to not consider this to be a policy, but to read it tonight just for clarification purposes regarding the correspondence section of the publicized agenda for meetings of Town of Manchester by the C boards and committees. Past practice for items included in the correspondence section of the agenda for the Board of Selectmen has identified primarily letters received by the town office of the Board of Selectmen that were deemed to be notifications of public interest. For example, changes in the Comcast service, notification by Clean Harbors of their process for clearing a small mercury spill on a town sidewalk. That was drawn from an agenda, previous agenda. These items are considered to be of public importance, but do not require a separate agenda or item for board discussion. For the sake of clarity as to the purpose of the correspondence section of the agenda, the Board of Selectmen will include these notifications in an agenda section called Public Notifications, and we will drop the name correspondence. And Greg noted that all correspondence received, both email and hard copy letters, are public documents unless they qualify for an exemption. Most correspondence are associated with agenda topics and will be noted as part of the discussion of the topic during selectmen meetings. So that's what we've been talking about. That's the first reading of this, and we'll finalize the policy at our next session with any further edits that are necessary. And
on that bullet that we've been talking about, I would like to say that the town address created for each committee accessible only pursuant to a public records request. All right, that's the end.
is that the sense of the board? Yes, no, thumbs up, thumbs down?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
okay, let's move on to the next agenda item, which is utility abatement request for 31 Proctor Street. And you received in your packet a brief summary of the history behind this abatement request. The billing quarter involved was July 14th of 2020 is that correct, Greg?
No, wrong date, 10/6/20. not
Okay,
21.
October 6th, 2020. And the usage was 88,000 cubic feet, which for members of the public who are listening is an extraordinary amount of water. On 11/17, the homeowner emailed a local nursery who does their irrigation work, inquiring if there had been any thoughts or ideas as to why the water bill was so high. The nursery replied, "The last time we were on the site this summer, my crew found a large leak in an irrigation line behind the stone wall along Proctor Street, and we repaired the line. On 11/23, the homeowner emailed the town stating the leak that they found is in an obscure location that would not have been detected had Corliss not been doing some other work in that area. So this leak could have been in place for some time. We reread the meter on November 19th, 2020, and the usage dropped back to a normal level. Water usage from 10/6/20 to November 19th, 20 was 1,700 cubic feet, indicating that the leak was in fact repaired. The reading on the meter of 1/6 continued to indicate things were working fine, only measuring an additional 200 cubic feet since the 11/19 reread. The homeowner applied for an abatement, and the former chair made the decision that since it's the first time, they get it at a discounted rate. The original bill was $7,331.47 based on multiple tiers of pricing. The recommendation was to give a discount using only the lowest tier, which is for the first 100 cubic feet. No, excuse me, which is for the first amount of cubic footage of water used. That reduced the bill by $1,857.87, making the new billable total $5,473.60. Okay, that's where we are. And if Mr. Bullen would like to.
Yeah. So I'd like to clarify something.
Go ahead.
Some years ago, we were addressing water abatements, and the Board of Selectmen at the time put in place a policy which allowed residents who had suffered an event like this, or for whatever reason had a high water usage, to apply for an abatement without coming before the board, and to do this through a fairly specific process with the DPW, wherein they would have to submit a record of repair, and then the DPW would develop a cost for the water used based on the cost of the water production. And that cost formula was something that would be agreed on by the town administrator and the DPW. And this was actually a fairly specific policy designed to deal with this exact circumstance. And it was also had elements in there to deal with frequent flyers. You could only submit one of these requests within a certain period of time. You couldn't come back 6 months later and do it again. And it also included, as I recall, provisions for forgiving the septic under these circumstances if there was a leak in a line connected to the sewer. Anyway, based on the description of the negotiations that happened here, I'm not sure that that policy was followed, and I'd like to know if the actual written policy was referred to in these steps that were taken.
Yeah, just
That
as a
is,
point of
and I should clarify further that I didn't make a decision that the phrasing in that document is not what I said. What I said when I made the decision not to bring this originally before the Board of Selectmen was that there was an existing policy and that I wanted the petitioner to go through the machinery of that policy, which previous board had established before it could come before the board of selectmen.
Eli, I just want to, I'm sorry, there's an echo somewhere. I just want to clarify, was this a policy that was adopted by the Board of Selectmen?
That is correct.
Okay,
Yes,
thank
it
you.
was. So
Greg, do you want to respond to this?
Sure. So I think it's fair to say that the letter of that policy was not followed in this case, and that there's been some loss of translation that we need to shore up a bit here. So I think they interpreted the policy as applying the lowest rate and not basically the sort of the wholesale costs, if you will.
So if the policy had been followed, what would the rate have been? What would the cost for this bill have been?
So I don't have that number off the top of my head in terms of what is our actual cost of producing the water. We would have to do some calculation. I mean, you could argue that we only charge to cover our costs on an annual basis. So what costs are we supposed to factor out? I don't know that we have gone through that exercise in a detailed way and brought that back to the board.
Okay. Is Mr. Bullen here?
What was that?
Is Mr. Bullen here? Is he present?
I don't see him.
I don't see him, but I see a number of telephone.
No, that's true. Yeah.
Okay, since Mr. Bullen does not appear to be present for this, I'm going to recommend that we continue this discussion in our next meeting and that we do a calculation based on the policy. That this is the first that I've heard of that policy. So if we could work out the calculation based on that policy so that the board knows whether to follow that policy or not, or make an exception to the policy in this particular situation, that would be most helpful. And I'd like to table this until the 20th of September for our next meeting. Is there any objection to that?
Nope.
No, Jeff, I might also ask one more. I'd just be interested in what typical billings were for that period in previous years. I don't know, 88,000 feet. I'm just looking at some numbers. Is it usually 8,000 or 5,000 or 2,000? I just make sure that that's part of the information that's provided.
Sure, we can do that.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, moving along, whipping right along here. Let's take up the, we have two candidates who were both interviewed in previous sessions, Brandon Lamphere and Ashley Oakes, for one opening on the Conservation Commission. I don't have in front of me, excuse me, how long this opening is for, whether it's till next spring or whether it's a 2-year, 3-year opening.
It's a 3-year.
It's 3-year? Okay.
Yeah, I believe it's a 3-year. Yeah.
It's a 3-year opening. I think we've already gone through and interviewed the two candidates. You have the information that you need to make a decision. Entertain a motion in support of either of the two candidates. for this seat on the Conservation Commission?
I'll
I'd like to make the motion.
Go ahead,
Uh,
Becky.
I just was going to make a motion to approve Ashley Oakes for a 3-year term to Conservation Commission, which would run to 2024.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion of that motion? Okay, roll call vote. Mr. Bowling,
Yes.
Ms. Jaggs,
Yes,
Mr. Round,
Yes.
Ms. Harrison,
Yes,
Mr. Bodmer Turner votes yes. Okay, so Ashley Oakes, and Ashley, I believe you are on this call. Is that the case? Yes, I see your name. You need to check in with the chair of the Conservation Commission and perhaps with Mr. Fetishfield regarding the issues that were raised in a potential conflict of interest before town council.
Okay,
Okay, and they will clarify what the rules of the road are for you on that particular area. Okay,
good, thank you.
all right. Thank you for coming forth to provide the service.
Jeff, if I may,
Yes,
I believe Brandon might be on as well, and I just wanted to say thank you very much and thank him for stepping up, and I hope that he does so again. We have many other areas that need help. Thank you.
okay, and I also endorse that. I just saw Brandon's name after checking previously.
So I do this for an hour and a half, and then I go downstairs and she's never there. Which makes me.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it. And I wish Ashley well.
Which makes me.
Thank you very much, Brandon.
Because we have like a 1 o'clock.
Okay. The next item on our agenda is a letter to the Department of Housing and Community Development, Undersecretary Jennifer Maddox, which you received in your packet, related to the regulations within DHCD that exclude from the subsidized housing inventory units that are not subject to a lottery. I think that that's the basis for this letter, which limits the number of people who are in the Powder House Lane project, the Powder House Lane Apartments, to be enrolled on our SHI. You've had an opportunity to look over this letter. Any concerns, comments, questions? I don't want to edit the letter in this meeting. Whether we should go forward with a letter of this type, and we could leave it up to Greg and perhaps an interested board member who wanted to work on that together. But whether we want to continue to move in this direction or not is basically what I'd like to have the discussion centered on.
Jeff, I have no objection to a letter of this type. They're reading through this letter in our packet. I had a number of places where I personally would have edited it. In some cases, substantively, to ensure that it was really a letter that was clearly coming from the perspective of the town. And there's a lot of good material in here that I support. I do think it needs some editing.
Okay. Other board comments?
If I may,
Go ahead, Becky.
I really like the idea of this letter and pointing out, well, I really like the idea of the letter, but I agree with Eli. I think there does need to be fine tuning of the purpose.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ann?
I'm uneasy about the whole of the letter. The premise, my understanding is that the Department of Housing and Community Development is interested in creating new affordable housing. And I think they would be reluctant to endorse putting units on the SHI that were, what's the word? Organically grown, locally grown. I think I would have to know a great deal more about the attitudes of the housing and community development before I tried to suggest that we could increase our SHI without providing any more affordable housing. That's it for me.
Okay. I think that the intent, I think that the letter is a request. That doesn't necessarily mean that we expect this request might be granted out of hand. So I'm not sure how we can predict the response of DHCD to the letter. And is there a downside to doing this? Making this request?
Jeff, if I may.
Wait a minute.
Okay.
Ann, is there a downside to this?
I think so. I think making a request that they would find unreasonable would tend to cause them to lean against other requests that we might make.
And if the letter were framed in terms of securing housing that was affordable in the town, that is, keeping it in place rather than having it go to other kinds of development.
Makes me uneasy. I wouldn't be happy having my name on it.
Okay.
Jeff?
Yes.
Jeff? So
Let me go to John. Let me go to John first, Eli.
Okay.
sure.
Jeff, yeah, I understand the point that Ann is making. And the bottom line for this letter for me is that you're really just asking housing, the DCHD, to have some consideration for people who meet all of the requirements, but you're not creating a personal upheaval in their lives by throwing them out and having them reapply for a place that they are qualified to occupy. It's true that this, for the place that they're in, that we're not adding to the affordable housing, but there may be landlords who are very concerned about the people that are in their apartments and are considering this. And if in fact they knew that the people that met the requirements would not be thrown out, they'd be more inclined perhaps to convert the housing to permanent subsidized housing rather than selling it at a market rate for some development or just to have it rented at market rates. But it's really an appeal to them to consider the lives of all of the people that are already there and meet the requirements, and why create undue stress. I think the letter should also be a little bit shorter. I mean, how many pages? What is this? 1, 2, 3.
It's just over 3 pages.
Yeah, it's a little long. It's a little wordy in terms of where you finally get to. At the end, you look at it and say, this is really the bottom line.
Okay. Eli, you had a comment, and then I'm going to open for.
Yeah. So I do, in fact, share some of Ann's concerns. And I was getting at that obliquely with some of my comments about moving the focus or the tone of the letter to something coming from the town. I also, the way you put it, from my perspective, was a little bit better, namely changing the tone to indicate that we were looking to keep in place affordable housing. And I think that it could be definitely bent a little bit more in the direction of compassion for residents who find themselves in this circumstance. It's in there, but it's also clouded by some of the language in the letter. So I think if we re-edited this, it might make the letter more palatable to everybody.
Okay.
Agreed.
So Christina DeLucio has her hand up, and I'd like to take your comment in just a moment, Christina. No, go ahead, Christina. You're muted.
Sorry about that. Wrong one. I muted. I'm just having a hard time following you. Is there a way to get a copy? Can you put it on the screen? Can you share it, the letter? I'm just having a hard time following.
I really want to avoid that, Christina. I understand this may be a hard conversation to follow, but this letter is a first draft, and it's a very rough draft, and it's not ready for prime time. It's not ready for screening. I'm just asking for the sense of the board, whether we want to proceed to try and edit this letter and make such a request of DHCD or not. And the basic parts of the letter are that under the current policies of DHCD, naturally occurring low-income housing with people who qualify in place don't qualify for subsidized housing inventory, which to me is a little bit of a surprising policy on the part of DHCD, given that under 40B, they're willing to count all the units when of a 40B project, when only 25% of them are as defined affordable housing. So 75% of at-market units are counted on the subsidized housing inventory when a 40B project goes through. So I understand your request, Christina, and I think that what I'd like to say is that we'd be happy to put this up the next time that we discuss this, which will be on the 20th, I believe, and share it with the public directly. But it's a very, very rough draft, and we want to make sure that it's expressing the intent of the town more accurately, so that we can make a decision about whether we want to send it or not.
Thank you for repeating that. That helped.
Okay, okay, thank you, Christina, for your question. Okay, so now I'm going to toss this back to the board. Is there any board member that wants to work on this with Greg or whoever Greg designates to try and get this letter into the kind of position that we've been talking about tonight?
Yeah, shoot me a copy of that doc and I'll do a round of edits on it and get it back to Greg by today is Wednesday, by Friday.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, so you want a copy of it in doc form. I believe it came to us, Eli, in doc form.
Jeff,
Yes, ma'am.
if I may ask, would it help to have somebody from either Manchester Affordable Housing Trust or from the housing take a quick look at it as well?
That's up to Greg to designate.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. If it isn't, we'll get you the doc, Eli. Greg, do you have that in doc form?
Yes.
Okay,
So yeah, I'll get it to you.
okay. So the next item on the agenda is COVID, and this is a COVID update and a brief discussion of outdoor dining and mask mandate update. I had scheduled this originally on our agenda for 40 minutes of discussion, and we're running about a half an hour behind. Excuse me, no, actually we're running now about 20 minutes behind. So I'm going to limit this to a 40-minute discussion so that at 8:20 we will stop the discussion no matter where we are. And the reason for that is this is a discussion that can go on in a lot of different directions for a long time. And I'd like to try and keep it as on point as possible. To start with, we've received feedback, both positive feedback and some very strongly worded and advertised objections to this mask policy or this mask mandate. The core of those objections falls into certain areas of clarification and definition for, and I'm taking the mask mandate first and then the outdoor dining. For how does this apply in certain situations? The mandate is as moved and seconded and voted on by both the Board of Health and the Select Board, is for all public, all businesses and or other spaces which the public has access to. So this applies, therefore, to houses of worship. It applies to membership clubs. It applies to gyms. It applies to retail and restaurant places of business. It applies to offices. if the public has access to them. So the primary defining characteristic is public access. I'm not going to argue with people about the efficacy of masks. If you're interested in that, there's lots of information online at the CDC and at other government and medical sources. People have their own opinions about masks. I just want to clarify what the rules of the road are. So there is a state mandate for masks. It's applied to very specific areas. It's applied to public and private transportation, healthcare facilities, congregate care facilities, emergency shelter programs, houses of correction, Department of Correction, prisons, jails, and other correctional facilities, healthcare and day services and programs operated and licensed and regulated by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, including the Executive Office of Health and Human Services or one of their agencies, and home healthcare workers. All those areas are mandated by the state. And we've had questions about, well, who's mandated? And I would suggest that we follow the state guidelines for who's mandated. And those guidelines that are printed on the state COVID website are the following. Persons are exempt from face coverings requirement if they are children under the age of 5, persons for whom a mask or covering creates a health risk or is not safe because of any one of the following conditions or circumstances. The face mask or covering affects the person's ability to breathe safely. The person has a mental health or other medical diagnosis that advises against wearing a mask or covering. The person has a disability that prevents them from wearing a face mask or covering, or the person depends on supplemental oxygen to breathe. Those are 5 conditions, including the children, that the state says would be exempt. So I would suggest to the board that we adopt those conditions for requiring face masks. This does not mean that we're going to go and interview people who are not wearing masks. We may ask them, they could be asked, but we're not going to go around and try and enforce this policy in any kind of draconian way. The idea behind this policy is to help us contain the spread of a vigorous variant that is capable of infecting both vaccinated and unvaccinated people. The information on vaccinated people being subject to getting COVID-19 in the Delta variant is available online and varies in terms of the studies between 25% of those who are vaccinated in the state of California, in a state of California study, and up to 70% of those who had been previously vaccinated in Provincetown, Massachusetts. So breakthrough infections are for real. It's not true for everybody, but they are for real. And you could be a carrier without knowing it. So really what we're asking for is for some courtesy on the part of protecting particularly the children in our town, but also the families who have children. Because a family member who maybe is vaccinated, who's exposed and a breakthrough infection occurs, and they are an asymptomatic carrier, can infect their own children. That infection risk is somewhat reduced by the use of a mask. I'm not going to say it's going to be prevented by the mask, but it's reduced by a mask. And the science behind that is very clear. Those are my opening comments. My question to the board is, do you agree that we should adopt the state guidelines for face covering requirements as a guideline for our own requirements or not?
I agree.
I agree.
Likewise.
Okay,
Okay, so I'm not going to vote on this. We have a consensus of the board that we're going to adopt those guidelines for Massachusetts. The Massachusetts guidelines, I mean, for Manchester by the Sea. Okay. Now we come to outdoor dining. Oh, and by the way, I'm looking for my notes on this. Yes, here they are. 76 other municipalities have mandated, in Massachusetts, have mandated the use of masks within public buildings, and 35 other towns and cities have done a full mandate, according to the most recent information that I could locate. Okay. In regard to outdoor dining, you have the information that was in your packet, which, by the way, back to Christina Felicio's request to see the document. The board in their meeting on August 14th is working on a way of being able to post the packet for our meetings to increase the transparency of the discussions that we're having with the public. And we haven't quite got there. We haven't quite gotten there yet, but we're on our way. And that was the sense of the board, that we should try and provide more information to the public about our discussions. I know that in all the meetings that I used to go to for the school committee, not having access to the packet made it really hard to understand what was going on. So we're trying to get to that place, and we hope to have that in place soon. In an informal survey of retailers and restaurants in the town, the retailers were, in contrast to the discussions about taking parking spaces for outdoor dining, this is expanded outdoor dining because many facilities already have outdoor dining. And specifically about taking a single parking space in front of various restaurants in town so that they can have patrons dine outdoors. Surprisingly, with one very strong objection, other retail businesses were saying, if they want to do that, that we should go ahead and do that. That is to provide an outdoor dining space on the street. And I say surprisingly because last year, the retailers were pretty strong in their opposition to maintaining the spaces outdoors. The suggested policy that was put forth was a policy of having any outdoor seating done with a reduction in indoor seating to equal the amount of outdoor seating that's captured. And we get feedback from the restaurants, a couple of the restaurants anyway, that that was not where they wanted to go. So our discussion tonight is whether to expand outdoor dining to a single parking space in front of the 4 restaurants, if they should so desire, that had outdoor parking space dining last year. And that would be Kala's, The Mooring, Antique Table, and Beach Street. And whether or not that should be done with a concomitant decrease of indoor dining. Okay, Chair recognizes Eli.
Okay, so just to clarify one fine point, the proposal that was put forth to restaurants regarding the expanded dining on the taking up the parking spaces, it was communicated to them that what was being proposed is that we would expand outdoor dining into those parking spaces, provided there was a commensurate reduction on the indoor dining based on the numbers of diners that they would support in the parking spaces. Is that correct? Because I think there may have been some people who thought that just even maintaining their existing outdoor tables was going to require them to reduce their indoor footprint.
We can clarify that tonight, that was not the intent that I understood. It was just for any increase at this time into on-street dining or on-street or sidewalk dining that was incorporated into an on-street presence in a parking space. So that was my understanding, but we haven't completely laid this out, and I'm not even sure I'm in agreement with it. So
so I think we conveyed the message that you would lose some indoor seating if you were to expand your outdoor seating. Now, whether or not they interpret that as all outdoor seating, I don't know. We didn't mean to imply that. But they certainly heard that if they wanted to add seats in a parking spot, that they would lose some indoor seating. And I think that dampened the enthusiasm,
okay,
for expanding outdoor dining.
the chair recognizes Ann.
I thought at some point there was a discussion of requiring that the outdoor space be used at some reasonable fraction of the time, that the space just not be sitting empty except Saturday afternoons.
That certainly has been proposed. Monitoring and enforcing that would be very challenging. But we haven't allowed for outdoor dining on the street in a parking space to date. These have just been discussions, and we can propose and affirm any arrangement that we wish. But we need to do it quickly if restaurants are wanting to do this so that it can be put into place.
Jeff, if I may.
Yes, you may, Becky.
I don't see that we heard from either Antique Table or Callas regarding an outdoor spot. I don't see them on this. Did they just not respond?
I'm not aware that whether they
No.
responded or not. This is up to having the initiative of any one of the restaurants to say, yes, we would like to expand under the guidelines that you've set for the outdoor dining expansion. So they're going to have to take the initiative to say, we would like to do this, and this is how we understand the guidelines, and we're in agreement with that.
So Becky, if I could jump in.
Thank you.
Jeff,
Go ahead, Greg.
yeah, well, Sonia can correct me, but I believe we did hear from Callis, and they were basically focused on doing the best they can with their indoor seating. I think, and again, we had couched that in terms of having lose some indoor seating if you were to expand outdoors. I think they said we'll stick with what we've got. And I think Antique Table, again, Sonia can correct me here, but I think they were satisfied with their patio out back.
Thank you.
So we're actually down to alleys in the mooring because there's been no change at Bravo by the Sea.
Right.
Jeff, you looking for opinions?
I am looking for suggestions for guidelines and whether you want to go forward with this or not.
All right.
But let's start with whether you want to go forward with this or not.
I don't. Here's why. We're into September. There's a limited amount of time that this would actually be available no matter what. And I think that it's just going to end up whipsawing everybody at this point. And I know that there's a significant number of people who would like to have the outdoor dining, but we have not been able to objectively establish an effective way to use it from a standpoint of managing public health, as far as I can tell. And so we're just going to end up creating an arbitrary and very temporary policy that no matter what is going to produce problems and a lot of extra work for people. It doesn't sound like the restaurants are jumping up and down about it right now, given the kind of constraints that we would want to put them under. And I just don't see the benefit to anybody from trying to stick this temporarily square peg into this temporarily round hole right now.
Okay. Other board members?
Yeah, Jeff, if I may, I concur with Eli on all of his points. If I'm a restaurateur and I look at it and I'm trading out some seats inside for some seats outside, I just put my seats at risk because there just aren't that many sunny days left. And when the weather's not good, that just means their seating capacity is down. I wouldn't see why any of those folks would. I also, just from a personal perspective, I don't like the clutter look. Having a bunch of barriers out there in the street, it just takes away from the ambiance of the town. So with such a short bit of time left and really the restaurant's not particularly enthusiastic about this, I certainly think we should stay with what we're doing.
Ann?
I agree with John and Eli.
And Becky?
I personally loved seeing the outdoor dining. I thought it brought such a vibrancy, and I think it actually got more people to stop. However, that's not what we're discussing tonight. And I think because of the lateness, the time of year, and the lack of real enthusiasm on the parts of the restaurants, I don't think at this point in time it makes sense to revisit it right now.
I think that basing our decision on the lack of enthusiasm by the restaurants, they don't know what the policy is because we haven't, the guidelines are, because we haven't put the guidelines out there. And I have a different perspective on this. But I don't want to cut off anybody else's discussion of it before I share my perspective. So I'm hearing that from the other members of the board that you think it's too late, there's no enthusiasm, why disrupt things? And a little bit of, well, you know, it was okay, it really made things vibrant, but why disrupt things for a short period of time? I personally don't think I want to make the decision for the restaurants about whether they would utilize an outdoor space or not. That decision to commit to do this is up to each individual restaurant business. My biggest concern about doing outdoor dining earlier, before Labor Day, was that we hadn't heard from the retail businesses, and we have now heard from a number of the retail businesses, and they're saying, boy, you know, it's okay with us, with one exception, one strong objection. My own take on this is it offers an option to people who do not feel comfortable going into a restaurant to, excuse me, to participate in dining at a restaurant outdoors. And in regard to John's comment about, you know, there's not that many good days left, I think that if we did this with no strings attached, that you don't have to reduce indoors, that may change the interest in this from the restaurant's point of view. In regard to, this is not doing anything to help public health. If we don't do it, if we don't offer it as an option, then public health is the same as it would be as it is now. Because the state's not going to go in and change their guidelines around this in the next few weeks. So I would be willing to approve a policy with no reduction in indoor dining, single space, 6-foot tables, chair to chair, and through, I don't know, mid-October, sometime before Halloween. So that's my perspective on this, and it's a little different from everyone else's. I want you to hear what I have to say. I'm not going to necessarily win any converts to this, but I would like to. I have 2 people with their hands up, and I'd like to hear what you have to say. So, Becky?
I had actually 2 points with that, and I would love to see it. Do we know what other towns are going to be doing in terms of how long they'd have outdoor seating? That's a question, or outdoor dining for Greg. And I think that not decreasing indoor dining is a very good idea. I do think, though, that if we're going to designate a spot, we do need to ensure that they are going to use it, that it's not going to be sitting, you don't want to be babysitting, but it's not fair to businesses to have a spot taken up if, as was said earlier, it's only open on Saturday or something. Thank you.
Okay, Ann?
My question really is, why are we considering this at all? If we're considering this as something that we think would be good for the town in general, then maybe we should look at setting up rules that would be in effect, regardless of whether there was a pandemic. So we should study where we can have outdoor dining and make outdoor dining the default. If, on the other hand, we're trying to do something to reduce the risk of the pandemic to the town, then I think that trading off indoor space for outdoor space is a healthy decision. And so, and then it comes down to, well, it's really short term, the health thing. Maybe we should think about it over the winter and have something ready in the spring for wider use. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Ann. Eli?
Yeah, so Ann said pretty much exactly what I was going to say. I completely support it. I agree. There's clearly a pretty good call for some sort of outdoor dining support now, but I think that it needs to be done thoughtfully and with a lot more analysis into the appropriate safety measures and how to integrate it without taking away too much parking. It needs some work. It needs some actual honest to God work. And the different times that we've approached it so far, we've approached it on an emergent basis, an ad hoc basis. And I think if we just reestablish it now, we're just going to make a mess. And I think I completely agree with Ann. If we do want to move forward if the residents and the businesses and the town want to move forward with this, we should take a focused look at it over the winter and come up with appropriate rules, just as Ann said. But I don't think that we should do it right now on an emergent basis without a full, clear public health reason for doing so. And I just think we should stay away from it right now. We have other things to do. It's going to turn into a mess one way or another. That there are various different aspects of this that are going to turn into a mess.
Becky, you had your hand up. You do not want to.
Well, I did, and I just wanted to reiterate one of your comments, which was that it gives people who are not comfortable being inside an option to dine outside where they feel safer, if the restaurants would want to do that. That I think is the most compelling aspect to this, or reason that might be to do it.
I just want to put a frame around my comments that I'm not trying to make a public health recommendation about outdoor dining. Making more of a dining options for residents who wish to partake of outdoor dining. So in regard to the idea that we should come up with a permanent way of doing outdoor dining on our streets, I think that you might find that the support of the retail establishments that said, I'm in favor to allow public dining, outdoor dining and public curbside parking spaces, et cetera, might evaporate, or some of it might evaporate anyway, because that means a permanent loss of parking space. If we were to go in that direction. To those people who've made comments in emails and in other communications with the board about, well, you know, what about Newburyport and Salem, et cetera? These are much bigger communities that have a lot more access to parking in their core. And it's really, really different than Manchester, which has very limited parking in its core. And outside of that core, it's designated as residential only. So, I mean, if the board wants to take this up over the course of the winter as something that we're prepared to do in the spring in a more organized way, then making a decision on September 8th for something that probably won't happen until September 13th and would have to be broken down by October 25th. I can understand that and support that. So do we want to do an up or down vote on this?
I will move that we not move forward with expanded outdoor dining and parking spaces for the fall of this year, but the board take up the matter over the winter to investigate the possibilities and interest in supporting expanded outdoor dining on a long-term basis.
Second.
Second that.
Can you be clear about what a long-term basis is?
I don't really want to be clear about it. I want to leave it vague and allow the discussions over the winter to encompass that.
Okay. So any other comments on that motion? Which has been moved by Eli and seconded by several people. I think Becky was first. Okay. Ann,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Eli,
Yes.
Becky,
Yes.
the board, the chair votes no. Okay, let's move on. And we made it before the 20 past marker. And Helen, we're trying to tee you up next. We're supposed to be on at 8 o'clock. We're only 14 minutes late, Helen, and I thought it was going to be much worse than that.
I did too earlier in the meeting, so my hat's off to you.
We, as a board, we really ramped up our game. So we currently have 10 articles that have been proposed. This is not our final, yes, these are the articles we're going to put on the town warrant vote. But this is a discussion about those articles and as importantly, some of the issues that Alan has been investigating regarding having a safe fall town meeting. So in the list of articles that were passed out in the packet, there is one that's missing, which is that there is a second Citizens Initiative for Manchester Affordable Housing article that has to do with the number of units that can be built, an adjustment to the rate of development bylaw in the zoning bylaws. I don't want to discuss these individual articles too much. I just want you to be aware of them, and let's go on to the organization of the meeting. And we may come back to talking about those articles in just a moment. So Alan, go ahead.
Okay, so let me just start by introducing briefly. This will be repetitive for Jeff and Greg because we've had conversations about this, but it took me a while to get dimensions for the space that would be available in the elementary school for the meeting, including the new gym and cafeteria space, which can be combined. I've plugged that into the safe meeting space calculator that moderators have been using. And it looks to me as though that space with 6 foot spacing between pairs of chairs and a little bit of margin for safety, 20%, would allow us to seat 278 people in that space. We had 275 voters turn out for the annual town meeting in June, somewhat fewer than that for the annual meeting preceding that, in other words, in 2020. My hunch is that this meeting could significantly exceed that number of participants, which means we would not be able to seat all of them in that space. There is a potential for overflow space in the new elementary school. I haven't yet received dimensions for that, so I don't know how many people it would accommodate. The high school auditorium, as an alternative, it seats 450 people with additional, a maximum of 450 with additional rows of folding chairs set up in the central aisle between the fixed seats. If you assume that we'd only be able to use half the fixed seats because you'd need to social distance by 6 feet, that gives us a maximum capacity of 225, even less than the new elementary school. That leads me to conclude that neither of those spaces would allow us to conduct a safe meeting, subject to learning what the overflow capacity in the new elementary school might be. So I've been turning my attention to the possibility of holding the meeting outdoors on the football field under a tent. We would have plenty of space there. We would need pretty big tents because in order to accommodate 400 voters, which Jeff and I have discussed as a safe upper limit for the meeting, we'd need tent coverage of about 14,000 square feet. I've contacted the company that has provided tents to the high school to the school district for high school graduation. I don't yet have a price from them for tents of that capacity, but they were pretty sure that for a date in October, they would be able to do it. They're being pretty hard pressed because a lot of people are tuning to outdoor meetings, but they thought that we wouldn't have a problem getting their services in November, but we don't know what the cost would be. So I am thinking currently that my recommendation, at least, is that we begin to plan for an outdoor meeting on the football field on a Saturday afternoon if the football field is available. I've asked the school district to let me know whether it is available. I don't yet have a response from them on that. I just asked them this morning, so they're working that out. But we could do it on the field under a tent, probably with heaters. Greg tells me that our federal COVID relief funds would probably be able to accommodate this, although he has other priorities for it if we didn't need it for this purpose. So that's my update on logistics.
Okay, any questions of Alan?
Is it worth looking at larger indoor spaces in other towns, or is that just not something we want to consider?
It's possible. I need to check, because I believe among the emergency legislation the state passed last year was an authorization to hold meetings outside the town's limits during the pandemic. I'm not sure whether that expired with the governor's emergency declaration or not. So I need to check and be sure. I'd be interested to hear the board members' thoughts on that. My inclination is to think that people would probably prefer even to be outdoors in November under a tent with heaters than to travel to some remote other town indoors, but others may have a different judgment.
Yeah, I didn't know if Gordon College had a space that would work, or even Endicott. I just don't know.
I don't know either, and I will check tomorrow. Oh, I can't do it tomorrow. I can check on Friday and see whether the authorization to hold meetings outside the town's limits is still in effect.
Yeah.
Okay. Becky?
Alan, are you thinking of changing the date?
Yes,
Or
I think we would have to do it on a
And-
Saturday afternoon.
But in November, or are you thinking of October? And I'm asking because what would be the soonest we would be able to have a meeting if we were to do it sooner?
I was thinking we would still do it in November, close to the original date. The date I've asked the school to check on specifically was November 13th, which is a Saturday, before the date we had previously planned on, which was the 15th.
Yeah.
I've also asked them to check on other dates because it may depend on whether they're using the field for athletics.
Okay, thank you.
But I think moving it up into October might pose a problem for some of the articles that we have on the warrant, particularly those from the planning board.
Yes, they asked us to stretch it out as far as we could, preferably to the 15th. And it also concerns the availability of their consultant.
Yeah, although based on what the conversations I've had with the planning board members, at least two of them and Sue Brown last week, the portions that they're planning to bring forward are not controversial, not complicated. The presence of their consultant is probably not necessary.
Yeah.
Have we considered, in the case that the high school field is scheduled for a significant game, have we considered the coach field? End of message.
No, we haven't. But that's a good thought.
Logistically, I think that you've got nowhere near the parking for coach field. And there is a question about if people parked at the high school and we're going to walk over to the field, the bridge may not be open because of the construction. Because the construction's going on until December, I believe.
That reminds me of one other point that Avi had mentioned to me when I spoke with him a couple of weeks ago, and he reiterated this morning in an email, which is that using the elementary school space, even if it would accommodate the meeting we think we're going to have, could be problematic because the exterior construction will not be finished, which will mean the parking will be questionable. Walking over the grounds will be problematic. I'm going to have a more specific conversation with the school folks in a day or two about how difficult they think the exterior construction would make it for us, but it sounds like it's a bigger problem than I first understood.
Yep. Yeah, they aren't even close to having the parking lot done.
Don't think so.
And according to one of the guys who was working there that I talked to the other night, won't have it done until November or December.
Really?
Any other comments or concerns about meeting venue?
I think there's no decision to be made tonight. We still need more information. Whatever we decide about venue, though, I think given what's happening, at least as of today with COVID, it would behoove us to try and keep the warrant as short as reasonably possible, so that people can be in and out and not congregating any longer than they have to be, even outdoors in a tent with no side flaps.
If there was a weather delay, how would that work out?
Well, I think we would need to plan ahead and post an alternative date. I think though, if we have a tent with, especially if we have a tent that with heat, installed, the worst weather delay would be closing the flaps on the windward side where the rain was coming in. So I would think under almost any reasonable expectations for mid-November, we ought to be able to hold it under the tent, barring, an early season blizzard or something.
Or a late season hurricane?
Yeah, let's keep our fingers crossed for that, or not that.
I said that out loud.
Mid-November is pretty late. But then.
Yeah. Okay. So you're going to find out more about the tent, how that will work. How we might have a weather delay scenario, if that were required.
Yeah.
And how that gets built into the contract with the tent company. And you want to hear from us about shortening the articles or shortening the projected times?
Well, eliminating articles that aren't time sensitive and critical. We know, Jeff, you and I talked this morning, we didn't really see much to be gained by doing that.
The ones that aren't time sensitive or critical are real short timers.
Yeah,
on
yeah,
this post.
yeah. So I don't think there's a lot to be gained there, but I felt compelled to say it.
Well, we have, just to clarify, we do have a fairly good sized list of proposed articles here. We would still be selecting a subset of these, correct?
Yes. I mean, the only scenario I can see that would be different from that is if the COVID situation deteriorates substantially enough to the point that we wouldn't even want to bring people together at all.
That's extremely unlikely.
I think it is too.
I didn't hear what you said, Eli. Is that extremely unlikely or likely?
Extremely unlikely.
And I agreed.
Jeff, how do you want to proceed with are you looking for additional information about the venues, or do you want to get into the articles, or what do you want to do?
I don't really want to get into the articles tonight unless Alan does. I think we need to consider this again in our meeting on October 4th. And then we can start to really talk the articles, because we're going to have to, well, let's see, 4th, 16th. Yeah, we need 30 days prior to town meeting, right? So on October 4th, we're going to have to vote on the warrant or have a special meeting.
Yeah, and planning board needs a heads up on some of these, whether or not they need to hold hearings on them, right?
I think that 2 of the 3 planning board articles are definitely a go. The 2 that have to do with zoning. The other question, the article on planning board reorganization, it certainly needs to be considered a priority, but I'm not sure what we'll do with that. That will be a decision of the whole board. I mean, if you want to talk about these for a moment, the Hamilton article is a very high priority, and I could not see removing that from the warrant. Given the staging of the Parks and Recreation article, that's a very high priority, and I could not see removing that from the warrant because it involves staging of other projects and our budget work with CPC on the annual town meeting. The 2 zoning articles I just mentioned. The 2 SEMA articles, the one on 2 accesses to large developments, and the second one on rate of development bylaw changes. We cannot remove those from the warrant because they've been done by citizen petition. And unless we get an agreement from them to pass over the articles, we would have to at least have them be part of the warrant.
So the 2 access, just for clarification, the 2 access for large development, that went through as a citizen petition and didn't go through the normal planning board process?
This did.
Well, it is by citizen petition, but it also has to follow the planning board process. The planning board's required to hold a hearing on it.
Okay, so the whole,
In fact, the petitions were included in the packet. So you have the text of the article and the signatures. So Alan, are you saying that if they don't get a hearing before the planning board, that those articles would not be heard?
Well, that's right, but the planning board is required to hold those hearings within 60 days of when the selectmen transmit them to the planning board. Now, there's a timing issue there, because if they waited it out, 60 days would fall after I don't know when the selectman's office has forwarded them to the planning board, but I believe that they're already out of time if the planning board takes the maximum time to conduct the hearing.
Right.
So when it says within 60 days, it can't happen sooner than that.
No, it can happen sooner. It has to happen within, they have to conduct the hearing within, the selectmen have, I think, 14 days to submit the articles to the planning board from when they're submitted to the selectmen. The planning board is then mandated under Chapter 48, Section 5, to hold their hearing within 60 days of when they receive them. If you work out all those time schedules,
Yep.
there is the possibility that that would not happen before November 15th or November 13th.
So assuming that you accept those two articles tonight, which are in your packet, the planning board was planning on holding a hearing in October on both of those articles.
So we need to move on that tonight.
You should formally accept the two petition articles tonight as part of this section of the agenda.
And do we have any options in terms of formally accepting these articles? Or is it just that the Board of Selectmen has to acknowledge that the articles have been?
Right, it's really the latter. And so the petition process is set up so that if the requisite numbers of signatures are there, then it's pretty much automatic that it proceeds.
So if we have concerns about the legality of the articles,
But that's something that would come up at town meeting.
Yeah, you cannot decline even patently illegal articles. You don't have that discretion.
okay, so we just need to make a vote on it as part of a process,
Acknowledge receipt, that's what you're doing.
acknowledging receipt. Okay. So you want to take care of that right now? Let's do that. Can I get a motion to accept the two citizen petition articles or acknowledge the receipt of the two citizen petition articles from the Citizens Initiative from Manchester Affordable Housing?
I'll make that motion, but I have comments.
Need a second?
Second.
Okay, so motion is made by Eli and seconded by Becky. Comments of the board.
So I made that motion because essentially really we're required to as a pro forma measure. But at the last town meeting, when the 2 access road solution was not passed, or and when comments were made by the board, we indicated that we felt that the right way for this type of measure to proceed is for it to be raised through the planning board, to go through the normal public forum, public hearing process, to be established as changes to the bylaws. And yet again, we are in the position where we have 2 substantive changes to zoning or town bylaw that are being driven by an external process, not going through the intended process for that we have customarily tried to use. And it's not clear that there's an emergent need for either of these measures. There's something that could have gone through the planning board process and through focused public scrutiny, but that is not what has happened. And so I made the motion, but I am very opposed to the manner in which these articles have arrived.
Eli, I'm reluctant to disagree because I try to stay away from, as you know, substantive discussions about things that are coming to town meeting. And I'm going to make these comments solely because I think they are not substantive, but rather they are procedural. Chapter 40A, Section 5, the Zoning Enabling Act, that talks about amendments to zoning bylaws, specifically provides that possible amendments to the zoning bylaw can be initiated in a number of ways. One of those is by the planning board. One of those is by petition of voters who meet the number of signatures required to bring a petition to town meeting. That's specifically provided for, and that's what these petitioners have done.
Alan, I understand. I agree that the law provides for it. I know there have been cases where we've done it in the past. I'm arguing that in this particular instance, there was clear debate and pushback from this board on measures like these related to this topic, and it's contains specifically this process. We're urging these petitioners to drive this process through the planning board, and it was very publicly known. And yet, despite there being some strong indication from the public that that's the way that this should have gone, it didn't go that way. So I agree that they have the right to do it by law. I am expressing my opposition to it from a matter of context of the previous debates on this, and from a cultural standpoint, wanting these things to go through the planning board.
But the effect of their petition is to do exactly that. It still goes through the planning board process.
Actually, the planning board doesn't have the option to modify either of these petition articles along the way. Not substantive.
Well, but they do have the option to report to town meeting with recommendations. And
They do.
and those recommendations could include modifying the amendment or rejecting it.
Yeah. Or they could propose to have thought that they would prefer to have it in an entirely different section of the law. And that would probably be deemed something that was out of scope.
Well, I'm not going to anticipate a scope issue, but I think I don't want to go any further down this road because I don't want to be in a debate with you about it. I think we've both
I agree.
said what we need to say.
I agree. And thank you for the clarification about the procedural and legal issue. Now,
You're welcome. Hope I didn't overstep my bounds.
you came close, but you stopped.
Okay. Phew.
Becky,
Never mind.
okay. Are we ready to vote? Any other comments? Okay,
Jeff, can I ask a quick question?
sure.
Well, I've just been sitting
Could you
here
identify
listening.
yourself, please?
I apologize. I'm Muffin Driscoll. I am a member of the Affordable Housing Trust and also the Board of Selectmen's appointee to that board. So I'm sitting here listening tonight for the article, this conversation, the articles, and you've gone through the articles you have. I thought that the board, that the Affordable Housing Trust was looking to advance a non-binding question at the
Muffin, I'm
fall
going to ask
town
you to
meeting.
stop. I'm going to ask you to stop because we have a motion before the board to
Sorry,
accept the petition articles, acknowledge the acceptance of the
sorry.
petition articles, and then we can come back to that issue. Okay? Thank you. Any other board comments on this motion? Okay, so this is a motion to acknowledge that the receipt of the two articles that are in the packet related to rate of development, zoning bylaw change, and residential conservation cluster standards and dimensional requirements, zoning bylaw change. And let's go around and vote. Becky,
Yes.
Ann,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Eli,
Yes.
the chair votes yes. So Ron's here tonight on the call, at least his picture is. This now goes to the planning board for them to review it and take it through the next step and make their own recommendations to town meeting on these two articles. But these two articles will definitely be on the warrant. Now, any questions about that? Good. Now, Muffin's brought up a question about, wait a minute, you didn't say anything about a non-binding support to include DPW garage site and affordable housing proposal for land use, which is on the sheet in front of us.
Great.
Which you don't
Thank you.
have access, which you don't have access to currently, but hopefully in the
Right.
future will.
So I apologize for jumping in inappropriately. I appreciate what you just said.
It's not the first time, nothing, but it won't be the last either.
Well, I'd like to think it is. So I was just looking to make sure that that article was still potentially existing. And with that information, I'm going to bid you all a good night and thank you for everything that you're
Don't go away
doing.
because we might kick it out tonight. Are we considering any of the articles that are here, which include the Hamilton article for swapping out the land so that they can construct the road further away from Gravelly Pond, the Parks and Recreation design work for practice field at the burn dump site, the two zoning articles of renumbering and modifications and deletions of sections of the zoning bylaw for case law compliance. And I may be butchering these articles a little bit, but these were the summaries that seem to apply. A planning board reorganization article, the article that I just mentioned with Muffin, non-binding support to include DPW garage, support of the town to include the DPW garage site in the affordable housing proposal for land use. The renaming of the BOS to select board. The two SEMA articles that we just went over, and an article to dissolve the Water Resource Committee as a standalone committee and refer to Concom to appoint as a subcommittee. So those are the articles that we have. Do we want to consider removing any of those articles? In terms of long-range processes and the impact on long-range processes, the Hamilton article, the Parks and Recreation design work, the two zoning articles, the affordable housing article, all five of those have long-range implications that would be significantly impaired if they were not heard in our town meeting. So,
Jeff?
yes, sir.
So given November, middle of November in a tent, that changes my calculation a little bit. And of those, the ones that I would be considering to delay until spring would be the planning board reorganization, the renaming the select board, and dissolving the water resource committee.
Okay. And
Sorry. I would like to wait before we decide to drop any of the articles until we have a clearer idea of where we're actually going to be. So I would like to kick this can down the road.
okay.
I'm fine with kicking two.
We can't kick too far. We have a meeting on the 20th and we have a meeting on October 4th. We have to settle the warrant at the October 4th meeting.
How about we punt instead of kick?
Okay.
That's a shorter distance, so that's the 20th. Is that what you're implicating, Becky?
So
I would say,
how far are we kicking
Yeah.
to? Is my question. Are we quick? Well, we run into problems if we go all the way down to the 4th, and then we have to have a lengthy discussion over which articles are going.
I think we go to the 20th. Go to our next meeting.
Okay. Any objection to that? Alan, does that work in terms of our timing and certifying the warrant?
I think so. Greg, do you agree?
Yeah, so you could take more time, but certainly doing it on the 20th makes it easier for putting things into place.
I mean, we can go to the 4th to certify the warrant, to not certify the warrant, but to continue to discuss this. But the next meeting is the 16th. The next regularly scheduled meeting is the 16th. So it would require a meeting that was 30 days in advance of town meeting, of the special town meeting.
Yeah. Actually, a special town meeting has a shorter warning period, interestingly enough.
And what's that shorter warning period?
I think it's 2 weeks.
I think it's 28 days.
Is it 28 days on the
Okay.
special?
I
These and
believe
other
so.
important aspects of town meeting organization will be revealed at our meeting on September 20th.
We'll confirm for you for that.
Greg and I will come up with a joint
Yeah.
recommendation.
Something that's based on more than I think.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Okay, good. Moving right along. Alan, thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for all your work trying to organize a venue for this.
That's what I get paid for.
You have a career after you retire as town moderator in another 15 years to become a wedding planner. So
God help me.
pandemic wedding planner, excuse me.
Oh, nothing I aspire to, but thank you
Okay,
very
so
much.
the next item on our agenda,
Signing off.
I'm sure that Alan's signing off.
Good night,
Night.
Alan.
Thanks.
The next item on our agenda is the review of the water resources FAQ. So can we jump into that? There was a copy sent out that was a track changes copy in the packet, and then another finalized version that I sent out by email later this afternoon for those of you who are looking at your email in the afternoon of our meetings. Okay. I don't want to go through this line by line. What I'd like to do is to just say, is the board in support of this FAQ? There were other things that Greg mentioned in his notes that I'm going to ask him to talk about in just a moment. But in general, is the board in support of this FAQ? It's trying to get information that's
Jeff,
factual.
if I may.
Becky, Eli's hand is up. I think he beat you to the punch. So, Mr. Bowling, unless you want to defer to Ms. Jakes.
Ms.
Okay.
Jakes can go first, and then I'll go.
Okay, Ms. Jakes.
Okay. I have a concern about the way this has been brought forward, and I've mentioned this before. Mr. Gilbert has put documents under the letterhead of the Board of Selectmen, and I don't think that's copacetic until the Board of, even if it says draft or not, until the Board of Selectmen have approved it. That just doesn't wash with me. But the other thing is, why would this come under Board of Selectmen and not DPW heading?
So the thought was that you, as with your sewer and water commissioner hats on, it would be appropriate for you to do this.
Okay, but again, I don't feel it's right that somebody else puts together a document with the Board of Selectmen heading until it's been vetted and approved by the Board of Selectmen.
I would agree with you, and I will communicate that sentiment to the board unless there's an objection to Mr. Gilbert. No objection? Okay, I will communicate that to Mr. Gilbert, Becky.
Thank you.
Eli.
So I broadly support the content of this FAQ. I would have a couple of changes that I would propose to it. Among other things, I think the thing should cite the comprehensive wastewater management plan. I think there's still a lot of people who don't know the existence of that plan. That plan actually does articulate where sewer can and should be extended and how, and provides a lot of useful information, although it's really, really large document. And I think there are a few other very small wording changes that might be appropriate, but overall, I think the document is a reasonable document and useful.
Okay. Other comments of the board? Becky?
Sorry. I did not get a chance to read over the revised document, but the one that we received earlier, and I think these are some of what you addressed, but the earlier document had a very definite slant bias to it, and I didn't get.
You broke up a little bit there. The earlier document you're referring to.
Oh, sorry.
Which document are you referring to as the earlier?
Well, the one that we had prior to your editing, or the one from today, which I haven't had a chance to go over. So the one that we received in our packets is the
Yes.
one I'm referring to.
Okay.
And that one I just felt had a very, again, distinct bias to it. And I think if we're providing facts, that's what we're providing, not pointing people into direction with those facts.
All right. Ann?
I had compared this with the document that Mr. Gilbert distributed in early April, and found both the one in our packet and this one to be much less biased toward we have plenty of room for development, we should be developing. I would have trouble finding the places where Becky is seeing an argument that this is a pro-development document. I think it's accurate and, you know, should be reassuring to the citizens that in fact we are not at the edge of either a wastewater or a drinking water crisis. End of message.
Question, Jeff.
Yes, John?
Were the changes, and I didn't get a chance to review the updated document that was sent late this afternoon, but are the changes largely organizational?
They were
or-
just formatting changes.
All right,
primarily
fine.
formatting
Not a
changes.
problem. Okay, so yeah, I reviewed it and I didn't get any interpretation of bias. Like Ann, I think it just said, here are the facts. This is our capacity. This is where we are. And I do agree we're in pretty good shape there. If people want to come to the conclusion, okay, you can do all kinds of stuff. That's just, you know, that's their bias. It's not necessarily, it's their interpretation of the facts. It's not changing the facts. So I was good with that document.
I would agree with Eli that having a reference to the town wastewater treatment plan in this would be a really good thing. I didn't want to get into the technical, I didn't want to go too far into the technical aspects of wastewater management. Nate's here, he could probably explain all that, but he can, he's shaking his head yes. But I don't want to overwhelm townspeople who are looking for basic information like, can I drink the water that's coming out of my tap and will there be enough of it? So
Jeff,
yes, Eli.
so my reason for including the reference to the comprehensive wastewater management plan was twofold. One was to provide a clear avenue for people to get that data, and two was to make it clear that the town actually has put a fair amount of research into the analysis and planning around sewer in town.
Yep.
Which I think is valuable.
And for people who like to dive into that stuff, the link should be there. I agree with you. I'm in support of that. Nate, welcome.
Hello. I was just going to say we could put a general disclaimer or just a general link to the DPW reports and information page that includes, many more of the reports, including the CWMP, other things on the wastewater side and water side as well as one avenue.
Rather than calling out one report.
Right. Yep.
I think that's reasonable.
I think that's a great idea.
Jeff, without going into too many specifics, I will have some edits for the one section on what are we doing about our issues with the wastewater treatment system. You just want me to forward those comments and email to DPW and Greg?
It said on page 2 in the middle where it's the options to avoid sea level rise.
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay.
They're primarily editorial in nature.
Okay.
You want me to burn time now or just send them?
No, I don't want to burn time now. I don't want to burn time now. Why don't you forward your comments to me? And
Will do.
And if anybody else has any specific edits that they would like to see done, please forward those to me, and then we'll try and incorporate what we can, and then have Nate and Chuck take a final look at this before we publish it. Does the board want to vote on publishing this, or are you satisfied with the opportunity to just review it?
I would like to vote on the final version.
Okay. All right, so we're going to get this done then by the 20th so that we can have a vote on the final version. Any other comments or questions about the FAQs? Beautiful. Now we're only almost an hour behind. Actually, we have the consent agenda with the meetings of August 16th and the reluctant resignation of Dana Menon from the Sustainability Committee. We need to identify how long Dana's term, how much is left. I think it's a year. I'm not sure whether it's up in May or up in May of 22. So that we can vet candidates for that position. Any other comments or concerns, questions about the consent agenda? We all had a chance to review the minutes. Ann?
Obviously, someone should send a nice note to Dana thanking him for his service.
Okay. Okay,
I'd like to make the motion to approve the consent agenda.
Becky's made a motion. We have a second.
Second.
Second,
Eli seconds. Roll call vote. Ann?
yes.
John?
Yes.
Becky?
Yes,
Eli?
Yes.
The chair votes yes. Public notifications is a letter from MAPC regarding the municipal elections to the Boston Regional Metropolitan Planning Organization. And there's enough information in there for anyone who's interested to follow up on. Okay, town administrators report.
All right. Sorry, let me just call it up here. Yeah, let me be brief. Construction update, the water line on Forest Street, that replacement is underway. Hopefully that'll avoid the multiple breaks that we have had in recent history on that line. So a new line should put us in pretty good stead. Still waiting to hear from the state about the timing of redoing the intersection of Harbor and Bridge. Recall that they did the repaving of Bridge Street heading towards Beverly, but they did skip the stretch right at the intersection there with the hopes that they will be coming back and turning that into a more standard T intersection, making it safer for both pedestrians and vehicles. But we're waiting to hear more details on that. We're also waiting to hear from MBTA and when they'll be returning to do more permanent fixes to the road overpass over the railroad tracks on Harbor Street as well. So stay tuned on those projects. On the compost project, we have a marked up contract back from Black Earth. We're in the process of reviewing that with Town Council and with Black Earth, doing some negotiations. And we're hoping to have the contract ready for your final review and approval at your next meeting on the 20th. Sounds like we're adding quite a few things to the 20th, but nonetheless, meetings are always busy. Thirdly, as you know, board and committee trainings you've identified as a priority that needs attention. We have been offered a very generous proposal from Sylvia Wiesendorp and Susan Beckman to do some pro bono facilitation of our boards and committees, working with boards and committees to help them work more productively as a board or committee. And in your packet was a brief outline of how they would do that initial work, basically interviewing committee members as well as other involved people, including yourself, in terms of how you view committee X, Y, or Z, and giving some insights as to what might help a particular board work more smoothly and more productively. And so this is something that both Sylvia and Susan, again, have volunteered to do for us, and would like your agreement to proceed with their work. And we would begin with a number of our boards and committees. So I would like a formal vote with you accepting their proposal to proceed. And then my last area is to comment on a regional grant that the town of Hamilton pursued. And this was for additional support for our boards of health and our public health nurse in particular. Hamilton pursued this initially with Wenham, and then they brought on Essex, and sort of at the 11th hour, they reached out to me to see if we would join in the application. It was last minute. I said, yes, we would be interested, with the understanding that our Board of Health would be able to be involved in the shaping of the support that they might receive from such a grant. The grant was awarded. The Board of Health had some concerns about the fact that they weren't involved from the very get-go. I explained to them about the timing and how it just wasn't time given the late notice that we received, but that there is time now for them to engage if they so desire. They are reluctant to do that, and I think it's a missed opportunity. And I'm not saying that we have to lock ourselves in for a long-term association, but I think it's worth exploring. And just given the challenges we had with COVID and the fact that we struggled to secure replacement for our longstanding public health nurse, I think we're in good stead now. But I also think that the next health crisis, it'll be very helpful to have additional support. And I think that this is an opportunity to explore ways to provide that. Again, it's nothing's cast in stone, and I think it's worth taking advantage of the opportunity to explore options. And so I would encourage us to have that conversation, both with yourselves and with the Board of Health. So those are the things I wanted to report on. It would be helpful at a minimum for you to give the green light for the work of Sylvia and Susan on helping us work with our various volunteer boards and committees on process and how they function. And then we can also talk a little bit about the regional grant and the Board of Health if that is of interest to you.
Jeff, you want a motion?
Yes.
Make a motion that we support the proposed training program with Sylvia Vriensdorp for town boards, and oh, that's good enough right there.
Second it, and may I add a friendly amendment
Sure.
to include Susan Beckman?
Is that acceptable, Eli?
Yes.
Okay. In discussion? Okay. Eli,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Ann,
Yes,
Becky,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes. I'm particularly concerned about the chair of a committee going against a voted recommendation of the committee.
I think there's some confusion on what took place. And she was going to revisit the tape, and we haven't followed up since she has done that.
Okay.
Can I make a comment?
Yes.
I'd just like to point out that as a town, we have discussed the need to look into various different options for regionalization of support and efforts. And we've said that repeatedly we would look for multiple options for doing this. So I think that this is, at the very least, looking into it is in our interests and something that we've stated as a policy. So I'd like to know a little bit more about why we might be turning away from this. And also, I think that in terms of making decisions about regionalization of services, those decisions should ultimately fall on the Board of Selectmen's plate.
Okay. Any other comments or concerns about that?
Jeff, what can we do now to strongly encourage the Board of Health to work with the other communities and understand how this grant can be best used? What are our steps?
So it may be helpful if one of you could reach out to some members of the Board of Health and have some one-on-one conversations, and then perhaps it's back on their meeting agenda.
I'm happy to reach out if that would help.
Your next meeting is when, Greg?
Is it a week from Thursday? Or is it this Thursday? I'd have to check.
Okay. I don't want to take the time now to check on that, but just so that Becky has a time frame that she needs to do this in. And Becky, I would agree. I mean, I'm very unsettled by the idea that a chair would not follow through on a voted recommendation of a board. And how that was communicated to the other regional partners in this grant. Our name was on the grant, right, Craig?
Yeah. Town of Manchester was one of the 4 communities that were part. It's a 4-town application. Yes.
And I assume that they've already started their planning process regarding the grant.
It's been delayed. They, at the last last meeting with the Board of Health, members of the Hamilton Board of Health and Wenham Board of Health were in attendance. And at that point, it was suggested that the 4 boards of health get together to start in earnest the dialogue and how this grant might be best used. And then in setting up that meeting, that's when it was indicated that indeed we were not interested.
And who told Hamilton? You said Hamilton and Wenham were at that meeting? At our BOH meeting?
Yes.
So who told Hamilton and Wenham that we weren't interested?
So subsequent to that meeting, then the chair spoke to the chair of the Hamilton Board of Health and indicated that we would not be participating. Which was the original vote of the Board of Health. But my understanding from the last meeting is that they would reconsider that vote after attending this joint meeting.
But they hadn't even attended the joint meeting.
Correct. So the Board of Health has a meeting tomorrow morning.
Mhm.
Great. Okay, Becky?
I was going to ask if I could get a little guidance as to what specifically we're looking for prior to my calling them. Should I reach out to Greg?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I'm happy to do this, Becky, if you want to have boots on the ground here in Manchester.
Well, I won't be there tomorrow, but I can certainly make phone calls.
Can you attend the meeting, the BOH meeting?
No, I cannot. No. So if you could attend the meeting, that would be helpful.
Yes, I can, and I will.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Any other business? I don't have anything that's not been reasonably anticipated by the chair. I think we did pretty well tonight, but we've been bouncing back and forth and we have an executive session to follow. So I'll take a motion to adjourn and go to executive session under Mass General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 21A3, to discuss strategy with respect to pending litigation.